Right, hello, welcome back to the Wednesday Bike Club. We're still bathed in lovely sunshine. Hey, marvellous. Can't beat that. And yes, I've still got the bear. I've still got a few days to go with this yet. But I thought today, actually, this episode was sort of spurred onto me, really, by Bruce, the Coast Rider. And it was something I saw this morning. I was filming something else, and I was having a cup of coffee, and I saw Bruce's post come up where he's bought a new bike. So he picked up a nice red chrome classic 350, and I could see the joy in his face from that. You know, the smile on his face because he picked it up for an absolute song. You know, fantastic price, and a complete no-brainer. But it made me realise, you know, how influential that bike was. You know, you start sort of thinking about things, like, damn, that was such a good bike. And it made me think about, you know, other bikes that, you know, what other bikes have been so influential today, you know, that have changed the way biking, the direction that biking has gone. And I thought I'd stick with two bikes, otherwise it'd be a far too long episode, but I will give an honourable mention because it is such an important bike. So let's go and have a chat about that. Let's find somewhere to park up that's not going to have any people there, so I won't get disturbed, and we'll have a chat about that. Come on. Right, so here we are, yeah. I came to the Sussex bench. I mean, we're sort of midday here, and anywhere else I go, it's going to be rammed. And this is like a little oasis, this place. Everything's so lush. It's even the stinging nettles are starting to come into flower, and oh, it's just lovely. The Sussex countryside is sort of, you know, that's really where my heart is, I suppose. But you know, I grew up in this sort of place and worked here as a keeper and all the rest of it, and it's just fantastic. Anyway, enough of that romance. So what am I, and I suppose there's a little bit of romance coming now, isn't there? So what am I talking about in terms of these bikes that made such a, if they hadn't existed, you know, how would the motorbiking landscape be in the UK now? And I suppose to a bigger extent in Europe, because there are certain things only that happen which have such a huge knock-on effect down the line. And we see that in all sorts of things, don't they? Sometimes they're tiny little things, aren't they? Is it the chaos theory? No, it's a bit like the chaos theory. The butterfly flaps its wings in whatever, and there's a storm in the Amazon, whatever it is. I don't know. But it's that kind of thing, isn't it? And motorbiking is no different in that respect. So the first bike really I'll bring up, but it's going to be more of an honourable mention because it's been so well documented. I suppose was the GS, you know, and that the GS came into existence, and it was already in existence before, you know, you and Charlie went round the world in it, on it rather, but that had such, you know, that we still see the repercussions of that bike. You know, how different is that sliding doors in it? How different would the motorbiking world be if in that first series that they did, that they'd have taken the KTM? You know, would there have been the same lust for adventure bikes that there still currently is? Although that's changing, and that brings me on to my next part of these bikes. But when you look at the whole landscape of motorbikes and if you like, the fortunes of BMW from that, you know, it made the Boxer engine such a mainstay of their entire range, pretty much, apart from some of the smaller ones. And you know, the GS became the best-selling bike for years and years and years and years. And even now, I think it still shows as the best-selling bike, doesn't it? But although certainly the best-selling full-size motorbike, although I still have a misgivings about how that data's gathered from registrations. And when I look at the 1300 GS, I don't see it quite as successful as the original incarnations, and we went to the 1250. But why I bring the GS up, because I think it links into certainly the next bike, which I think again has changed the whole landscape of adventure bikes in particular. And that was the Royal Enfield Himalayan 411. Because prior to 2018, before that bike came along, there wasn't really anything that was going to match the GS in its pure adventure style, was there really? Yeah, I know there was lots of bikes sort of on the periphery, but they weren't seen as, you know, it wasn't sort of breaking the mold, was it, like the GS did? And I think there was Royal Enfield obviously saw a gap in the market, which there still is a gap, but it's getting smaller, isn't it, for small adventure bikes. Now, although that 411 had a few teething problems when it first came out, there was a lot of issues with quality control. I seem to remember at the time, you know, there were headstocks falling off, you know, the whole fronts of the bikes would just detach through bad welding and stuff like that. They had troubles with the head bearings and all sorts of things. But I think they realised at the time that they were onto something really special. But didn't it take a long time for other manufacturers to catch up? And they had that market to themselves for such a long time. And I think the easy win for any manufacturer in that sector of the small adventure bike market was to give it more power, you know, give it more engine, because that's what a lot of people, you know, said about the 411, that it just didn't have the engine for it. You know, they wanted more power because we hadn't been used to having bikes with that low amount of horsepower. You know, 25 at the engine, at the wheel, it's probably about 20, 21 at most. But it worked, didn't it? And I think what it was doing, particularly in the UK, it was giving people of the generation, like my generation, who wanted the GS experience but didn't want the GS weight. And I think they saw that it was priced to make, it was a come by me price, wasn't it? Even though that was the right price for Enfield, it was like a real come by me price. It'd come and try me. I can show you things that you can do with this bike, and it became a huge success. And it wasn't actually in all world markets, was it? I think it took a while to get into the US market. But it went from the bike to have if you wanted to have a cheap do-it-all, cheap to run bike that you could take on an adventure, not like a rocket ship. But I've said this before about Enfields, is that they're the sort of bikes you can load them up with everything and they still ride the same. The power of the engine doesn't really make any difference. They just ride the same, which is always incredible. But you think how long it took other manufacturers to come on board with that. I don't know whether they just, so many other manufacturers, the mainstream manufacturers like Honda and Kawasaki, Suzuki, and I said whether they just, it's Indian, and that's not where the market is. People still want big adventure bikes, and they didn't. When you look now at the market now, and that we're swamped in these small adventure bikes, all that stemmed from the 411 Himi. And I think these other manufacturers maybe should be paying Enfield, a bit of a dividend out of their sales of these bikes. Because when you look at how the Chinese market developed, it came in straight in at the time when Enfield decided, right, we need to update the Himalayan. It's done its thing, it's run its course, we've got to update it. We couldn't really be running with air-cooled engines anymore. We've got to go water-cooled, we've got to get more power out of these bikes. Otherwise, that would be the end of that generation of Enfield bikes. So, as soon as they announced, well, we're gonna do a water-cooled, 450, everybody started to take notice, didn't they? And I think they could see that Enfield were really starting to build as a business again. That although they were huge in India, they were becoming a real powerhouse in motorbike manufacture. On the back of, remember at the time, they only really had the Bullet and the 411. It's extraordinary but when you look at them now, you look at Enfield now, they're extraordinary powerhouse. I mean, okay, they're small compared to someone like Honda, but then Enfield don't have that base in mopeds and all the rest of it. You go around the world, and it's Honda are the biggest manufacturer of mopeds. Really, they've cornered the market there. But even Honda, you know, had to up their game a little bit. They could see that, well, maybe we should be upping our game a bit in the small capacity adventure bike. And although they had the CB500X, it wasn't really seen as a, although I think it's a fantastic bike, you know, because I used one of those on my trip last year. It wasn't seen as a real mainstream adventure bike. So they had to up their game and made the NX500, which I think, although a great bike to ride, I think it missed the mark a little bit. I think they needed to have gone more. They should have developed the styling more, and it had all the functionality and all the rest of it, apart from the screen and the dash. I think they sort of undershot the mark there, didn't they? Really, they could have done a lot better, Honda. I think they were relying on their reputation for reliability and all the rest of it, and I think they should have done a lot better there. And they're still sort of in the mire in there. They're not in the mix, Honda, in that respect, in those small adventure bikes. So when you look at what the 411 started, it started that trend, and we've all the manufacturers now realised that, I think, that the big adventure bikes, the 1300s and all the rest of it, is not where the market is. You know, Harley Davidson came out with the Pan America, which I still think is actually a really nice bike, but people aren't looking at them. People aren't looking at them, and the second-hand values of those bikes, and also the GS, I think, is being hit because I think we're moving away from it. So the Enfield really started the trend, but it took a while for people to catch on, didn't it? So now when you look at the market, you know, you've got Kawasaki in there, Triumph in there. They're all at it. They're all trying to, you know, BMW, they brought the 450 GS out, which again is an incredibly expensive bike. You know, they're a premium brand, and but the Chinese have sort of almost put a big block in the way. You've got all these mainstream manufacturers trying to get into the market, but the Chinese have just put this big boulder in the way of all these bikes, and they're confusing the market, and they're giving you so much for so little, that I think Enfield are probably just sitting there laughing a little bit, thinking, well, we're still doing our thing, you know. I know they're looking at bringing out the twin Himalayan twin with the Interceptor engine, but I don't think that's a good move myself. But yeah, so I think that the Himalayan is the first bike that, if you, apart from the GS itself, that in the last few years has really affected the market, really changed the market and how the direction it's gone in. If the Himalayan wasn't there, I think it would be a totally different landscape now. I don't think you'd see all the Chinese bikes and all the rest of it at the moment. But the other one, and this is where I mentioned Bruce the Coast Rider when he's just picked up his new Classic 350, is that Classic 350. Because when you look at that and how successful it's been, you've got to realise, I think it's worth looking at why was it so successful. And I think it's that the demographic of people who are buying motorbikes, like me, and, you know, in this sort of age group, sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, we don't want a great big heavy bike anymore. We want something light and easy to use, but that's affordable, that's easy to maintain. And that Classic 350 absolutely hit it nail on the head, didn't it? And you got to think, I've mentioned these things before, you know, but my God, didn't they design something that was absolutely bob on? When you looked at the colours that they were doing, that the red and silver, red and chrome, I think will become an absolute classic. And by that I mean, I think when in 10 years' time people will look back and think, what was the bike that affected the motorbike market more than anything, particularly in the UK, was that Classic 350, because I think it brought a load of people back into biking. People that thought, I'm getting old, I don't want this, I don't want to be riding big bikes anymore, but it brought them all back, and brought new people into biking that thought, well, you know, I always wanted to ride a bike, but, you know, didn't really fancy it, and But you know, those bikes are pretty cheap and they look fantastic. I think I'll have a go. And you know, when you combine it with the Hemi 411 and then the classic 350, I think you got to think that Enfield, whatever they were drinking or whatever they were taking, you know, it was the right stuff, wasn't it? Because you've got to think, wow, a bike that's to change the market so dramatically, I think, in such a short period of time. Because when did that come out? Was it 2021, 22, I think it was? Someone correct me on that. To alter the market in such a short space of time and still maintain that position in the market, because you then had the same situation again with companies like Honda, who are the only people that really responded to that, you know. And they responded to it initially in the India market because, well, you know, it's a popular bike in India. We'll give you the what did they call it? It was the GB 350, wasn't it? But it was something else. It was called then. It was GB. I can't remember now. But it was almost an exact copy in terms of style and look to the classic 350. And you saw quite a few of them in India, and they're very keenly priced in India. But that bike, as it was then, wasn't really. It didn't have the certification really for the European market. It didn't have the emissions and all the rest of it, as far as I'm aware. So, you know, eventually they bought the GB350, and look how successful that's been. And you do wonder why some of these companies were so slow to pick up on it. And nobody still hasn't picked up on it again. It's only the market is cornered by Enfield and Honda, and you do wonder why other manufacturers are not doing that. I know that, you know, we could put the Triumph 400 into two camps, couldn't you? Really, and that's the clever thing with Triumph. They try to put their bikes into several pockets, so you'll get a bigger market share. You know, you've got more people that would be interested in it. You've got the Scrambler Brigade, you've got the Touring Brigade, you've got the Classic Retro Brigade and all the rest of it. And whereas the other two don't fill too many of those shoes, where the Triumph does. So I've always wondered where's the next Classic Retro coming from in the small capacity area? And is that because some of these manufacturers just don't have the engines for it? Or have they tied themselves up in a bit of a knot where they can't? It's a bit like going backwards, isn't it? Because you'd think I know Kawasaki bought that little, is it W230 out, but no one's interested in it, or doesn't seem to be interested in it. I dare say it's a great bike, but you think it's not enough. You know, you've gone too far the other way. We obviously had BSA playing the catch-up game. With their Bantam, which has been a really successful bike, and it seems to be proving itself pretty reliable. And that again was more of a sort of market disruptor, wasn't it? Because it came in at such a cheap price. A few teething problems with it started with paintwork, but I think they've taken a big chunk of certainly the UK market with that bike. And I'd still like to ride another one of those. I think I may get another one out, but the only reason that bike is here is because of the Classic 350. The only reason the GB350 here is because of the Classic 350. People could see that there was a market there, and they wanted to be part of it, and nobody else was rising to the challenge apart from those other two, and they came late into it. You can't believe that some companies like Honda can't respond quick enough. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts. What do you think? I think so much of stuff stemmed from the GS at the time. They set the trend for adventure, and then Enfield responded to that eventually, because, you know, blimey, at least 10 years down the line, more than 10 years down the line, it's a long time for one bike to have that market. It's extraordinary, isn't it? And you think that they realised at the time, whoever came into Enfield at that point thought, I've got vision here to do this. And when you look at the quality control and the manufacturing, the factories for Enfield, they're second to none, absolutely second to none. So it's an interesting area, isn't it? I love all this sort of stuff, looking at it. I probably get it completely wrong, but I think if you take the classic 350, the Hemi 411 and the GS out of the picture, if they were never made, if nobody sat down on a drawing board and put them together, what would the bike market look like today? It would not look the same, would it? It would look completely different. It'd be extraordinary. I think even if you just took the classic 350 out of there, it would be different. Any one of those bikes you take out of the equation, the whole landscape of motorbiking would be different. Totally different, in a big way, not just a little way, in a big way. So that's my thoughts. That's the Wednesday Bike Club today. They've all become icons, won't they, those bikes? They're all become icons, I suppose. But yeah, there you go. One thing, I must give a mention out to Ian, one of our subscribers, and we saw him at the Milk Churn. Me and Gary were doing some film with this, and I met Ian up at the Milk Churn, and he was enjoying the sunny day on his classic BMW, and he was out there having cheese on toast like we did. But nice to meet you, Ian. It was yeah, nice to meet you and shake your hand. So there you are. Right, take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the sunshine. I think that this weekend it's going to get wet. I think it's going to get wet. I don't think it will. I think that's an old wives' tale, and it's going to stay lovely. But look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.